Welcome to Securing America with me, Frank Gaffney, the program that's a kind of owner's manual for protecting the country we love against all enemies, foreign and domestic, to the glory of God and His kingdom. In the battle space in which we find ourselves, there is much confusion. That confusion arises in part because of, a lack of transparency, I guess one might say, on the part of some of the countries that are most likely to shape the outcome of these challenges, these conflicts, actually. I call it World War Xi, to be more precise. But in the pursuit of the Chinese Communist Party's goal of destroying the United States of America, Xi has had some help from some of his friends. And we're going to talk with one of our dear friends, one of our most, I think, impactful contributors, Rod Martin, about one of those friends, and then we'll talk about the Chinese, both of which are the subject of very, very insightful analyses that he has published at rodmartin.org. That's where you will find the Rod Martin Report. Rod is, among other things, the chairman of the board of our Institute for the American Future. You can follow our work there at usfuture.org. It's also a place where you can contribute to make this program possible. I hope you will do so. He is, among other things, a serial entrepreneur, as well as an essayist and now pundit of considerable renown. Thanks indeed to these two products, the platform rodmartin.org and the product, the Rod Martin Report. Welcome back, my friend. So good to have you with us. And thank you for the light you're shedding on some of these things that much needed.
Great to be here.
So let's start with Russia, Rod. You have written a piece that basically suggests that it's coming apart at the seams, not least because of what is being done by the Ukrainians to its energy sector. Talk to us about how you see the state of play in Russia at the moment, sir.
Well, it's slowly but surely, and it's exactly what we were talking about last fall. It just takes a while to happen, and Americans are used to these cinematic endings that wrap up in 2 hours. You can tell by the way they, a week or 2 weeks into the Iran conflict, oh, it's a quagmire. My goodness, what are you talking about? We've actually been in a ceasefire state with Iran longer than we were actually attacking them. So, where's the quagmire? There aren't even any ground troops. And that's how so many Americans look at Russia and Ukraine. Ukraine actually is in a quagmire, but it seems to be turning the corner in the exact ways. Again, you and I were outlining last fall. Russia is dependent on oil exports to survive. It is absolutely unable to fund its war without those exports. And our sanctions have actually been very effective. But starting in December, we started actually seizing shadow fleet tankers that are moving all this illicit sanctioned oil, primarily to China, also some to India. But India flipped. Shortly after that began, we signed a pretty impressive trade deal with the Indians right at the beginning of February. And 3 days later, India seized a Russian oil tanker, which is really kind of a big deal. They've been, a pillar of the non-aligned movement since independence, but they have always been pretty aligned with Russia. And all of a sudden, the script is flipped, and we're talking about a joint Quad-financed port in Fiji. And Rubio's over there talking about India as one of our most strategic, note this, in the first pass, partners. In his second pass, India as one of our most important strategic allies. That's on top of signing a defense pact with Indonesia, which controls, the Straits, Sunda, Lombok, Malacca. So from beginning to end, you have Trump squeezing that oil that oil financing that makes Putin's invasion possible. And then, oh, wait, all of a sudden, the Ukrainians have really gone on the offensive deep into Russia, strikes on refineries, strikes on pumping stations, strikes on port facilities, strikes far, far, far to the east of Moscow. And it's just transformative. So, this last month was the first month in which on net, the Russians actually lost territory. It appears that the Ukrainians have the entire land bridge from Russia to Crimea in firing range now, and it's just starting to look like a different war. So my guess is that Donald Trump, once he finishes what he's planning for Iran, he's going to turn his full attention to the Russia situation, not to finish Russia, not to just prop up Ukraine. Ukraine can't win, but Russia already lost. So the key is a durable peace where we aren't doing this again in 10 or 20 years, and that flips Russia at least partly from the Chinese embrace. And I would just cap that off with this. China has embraced Russia in a completely predatory and neo-colonial fashion, and Putin isn't stupid. So he knows that there's a better future to be had with U.S. investment and not an alliance, but a decent relationship with the United States.
Do you think there's a possibility, Rod, with everything you've said, that we may not be dealing with Vladimir Putin much longer? That his
well,
days
that's
are
always been the problem, hasn't it? I mean, this war doesn't make sense. It hasn't for a long time. At the rate they're going, it would take 20 to 30 years for them to capture the rest of the Donbass. I mean, it's just ridiculous. They're averaging about, a mile of advance a day. And like I said, this past month, the Ukrainians actually on net pushed them back. So, that's not viable. That's not realistic. But Putin is facing real problems at home. And I wrote a piece on this back last summer about how, Putin's war is finished. Peace may finish him. And we've heard a lot of rumblings out of Moscow in the last 2 weeks about growing dissension in senior places, and Putin needing to spin what is in effect a strategic defeat as some kind of victory. My guess is the only way he really gets there is with a massive quantity of American investment and a new status quo where Ukraine is, in the most positive possible sense, Finlandized.
Yeah. I guess the question that arises, though, and we'll talk about China here after a short break, but is it in our vital interest to have Putin survive? Do we want American investment to be tied to, a different regime, one that does not have his ambitions, presumably, frustrated though they've been, obviously, in Ukraine? And Rod, there's also a point that's been made to me that, the use of intermediate range ballistic missiles to attack Kiev, or Kyiv, as they now call it, is not just a message to the Ukrainians, but to others as well, especially given the possibility that those weapons could be configured with a nuclear warhead on them, of which the Russians have a lot and which Putin has repeatedly said is just another weapon. It's part of his tactic of escalating to de-escalate, perhaps, and a very ominous one at that. So all of this raises a question about his future. We'll talk with Rod Martin on the other side about it. Stay tuned. We're back with our pundit of choice. That would be Rod Martin, the proprietor of the Rod Martin Report at rodmartin.org. And please check it out, folks. We're talking about several of its important products. And just to finish the thought on, should we be reckoning, Rod, that there is likely to be more trouble with Putin, and that coming to his rescue with foreign aid and so on might or might not make a difference in the trajectory of Russia. In fact, may still have him more in the embrace of China than we want.
I think our issue here is getting to a durable peace between Russia and Ukraine, and we don't much care who's running the place. I think the issue for us is flipping Russia only partly as possible from China. They're not going to become our friend tomorrow. It's not going to be like that. And it doesn't matter if it's Putin or one of the oligarchs or a completely revolutionary regime. They are going to triangulate in exactly the same way that Nixon did. And that's not going to change. But if they aren't dependent on China as the sole buyer of what they have to sell, they have options and we can use that. And the more we tie them to us with trade and investment, the better it can be. And I would just point out that the Chinese also have their own interest in this that is just fascinating, and it just happened. We watched, the president go over and get this red carpet welcome from Xi Jinping. We saw Putin go, and they sent lower level people to meet him at the airport, and they treated him very differently than they treated Trump. And this is China, so that always has meaning. There's a message being sent that our relationship with America matters more to us at this point than our relationship with Russia. And here's the proof in the pudding. She still won't approve the big natural gas pipeline Putin wants from Siberia to China. Now, why on earth would Xi Jinping not want a natural gas pipeline from Siberia to China? That solves his problem with doesn't solve it, but it goes a long way to solving it with the Strait of Malacca and the Strait of Hormuz and all of the weak points that the American Navy can create and tighten against him. Why wouldn't he want that pipeline? And the answer is, I think he's already decided that at least under the Trump administration, he is actually better benefited by exporting more to the United States than by helping Putin out of his spot. And at this very moment, you've got 4 super tankers of LNG sailing from the United States to China. They're actually buying less from Russia and replacing some of those purchases with American supply. I think this confirms everything that we were talking about the victory of Trump's summit.
Fascinating. I had understood that Putin was getting basically the same red carpet treatment, but you're saying no, he's treated as a vassal, not as a
Well, maybe not
peer
a
of the United
vassal,
States.
but just less important. He got, the people who met him at the airport, like I said, are lower ranking than the people who met Trump. And just the whole thing had a different tenor. And of course, China sees Russia as well, lunch.
That's for sure. So, Rod, let me just ask you this. And speaking of China, one of the things that we keep hearing is that the Chinese are facing surpassing problems of their own, political, economic, you keep pointing out demographic, strategic. Um, the interesting, and again, you've got a very important piece about all of this in Rod Martin Reports. You're talking about China's economy is cracking. And unfortunately, the experts still don't see why. You've got some insights into that. But let me just put this proposition to you. The pressure on President Trump to make some kind of, I think, very dubious deal. I mean, not even really a deal, a memorandum of understanding, we're calling it, something that will, foreshadow some kind of negotiations sometime towards some end. I'm in a fool's errand, it seems to me at best. But that's predicated in part on the fact that the Russians and the Chinese are going to keep bailing out the Iranian regime. What you're saying in these companion pieces and what you've just described here suggests very much otherwise. Should he be making an MMU with the Iranians, and especially on the basis that the Chinese are in a position to bail him out?
Goodness, if the Chinese were going to bail them out, they'd have done something during the 12-day war last year. They're not going to do anything for Iran. And they affirmed during the Trump summit that Iran must never have a nuclear weapon. Now, their version of why was a little different. They based it on Iran's being a signatory to the Non-Proliferation Treaty. But the result is the same. And right after the 12-day war, the Iranians made another pitch to Beijing. Hey, please sell us some advanced fighter jets. We just got to have something newer than an F-14. This is ridiculous. And the Chinese laughed at them. I mean, just said there's no way. And part of that is because the Iranians wanted it on credit, and Beijing knows that Tehran isn't going to pay. But part of it was, and this is hilarious, and we published a report on this at rodmartin.org, the Chinese told the Iranians, the Israelis will have destroyed those fighters before we can get them landed in Iran. So it's just ridiculous. They are also concerned about Israeli infiltration, getting us the blueprints for the things in rapid order. And of course, all of that is true. Every second person in Iran works for Mossad. It's hilarious. And so, no, China's not going to help them. Russia can't help them. All of that is a smokescreen, a bunch of weak powers trying to show us they're strong. And yes, that includes China. Trump has completely flipped the map on China in less than a year and a half. He's shoved them out of the Western Hemisphere. He has clamped down control of the choke points in Indonesia and the Middle East. And I know that's a controversial statement, but trust me, nothing's getting out of the Persian Gulf that Donald Trump doesn't want to. And he's shown he can. And that's really the thing. China is the world's largest energy importer, and Trump has demonstrated the capability to cut it off at will. That's why they're buying from us. They might as well get stable, cheaper supply that they don't have to worry about because they can't really fight him. And yeah, if we elect Kamala or Gavin Newsom, that completely gets undone. The Chinese are going to invade Taiwan if we're dumb enough to do that, because they know those people will back down. But as long as you're talking about a Trump or a Rubio or a Vance or a DeSantis or a Cruz, I mean, this is their new normal. And they've got about 10 years before the demographic collapse really, really hits them. They've got to act soon. And if they can't act soon, we could avoid this war we've all been worried about for decades.
Well, you did set up our next conversation, Rod, and it won't be today. It'll be soon, though, I hope. Do they now see the Chinese Communist Party, that is, a window in which they have to go for it if they are going to go? And I'm perfectly prepared to acknowledge that it may not be a full-on invasion of Taiwan. It may be a blockade. It may be, I don't know, simply coercion of various kinds, or it may even be sort of an electoral transformation by getting the KMT, which wants to surrender the place, apparently, to the Chinese to do their bidding. We will be watching it closely, and I know we will have the benefit of your insights at Rod Martin Report, rodmartin.org. God bless you, my friend. Come back to us soon. And the rest of you will stay tuned. We'll be right back with more right after this.